Good morning. So this morning we're going to look at Mark chapter 4, and we're going to read verses 35 through 41 and see what it has to say for us from the New Living Translation. Starting at verse 35 of chapter 4. As evening came, Jesus said to his disciples, "Let us cross to the other side of the lake." So they took Jesus in the boat and started out, leaving the crowds behind, although some of the other boats followed. But soon a fierce storm came up, and high waves were breaking into the boat, and it began to fill with water. Jesus was sleeping at the back of the boat with his head on a cushion. The disciples woke him up, shouting, "Teacher, don't you care that we're going to drown?" When Jesus woke up, he rebuked the wind and said to the waves, "Silence, be still." Suddenly the wind stopped, and there was great calm. Then he asked them, "Why are you afraid? Do you still have no faith?" The disciples were absolutely terrified. "Who is this man?" they asked each other. "Even the wind and the waves obey him." Now, most of us have gone through, we've all gone through some form of education over our lives, and as kids and even as adults. And often, when you enter a course of study, you enter at a beginner level, and it can especially be true when you're learning a new language. That's a common one. When you're learning a new language, you move to a new country, you learn a new language, or even if you haven't left your country but you want to learn a new language, you start off at the beginning. So you have a beginner level. The beginner level, you're learning vocabulary, just certain words, how to say your name and address in that language, how to ask very simple questions, and it's very, very kind of just some very basic stuff to kind of get you started, and that's the beginner level. And you do that for a while as you expand your vocabulary, as you learn more new words in that language. You start to put some sentences together, and then you kind of move into an intermediate level. At an intermediate level, if you're learning a new language, then you can have simple conversations. You can walk into a store or walk into a restaurant and make an order or ask somebody for directions or have some basic conversations, and then you do that, and the more you do that, the more comfortable you get in that new language, and you start to feel like, hey, I'm really getting to know this language. And then you move on to what would be the advanced level. And at that level, you're learning more about some of the unique things about the language, some of the cultural things about the language, some of the sayings that mean certain things, the idioms, and you're starting to learn more of the complicated stuff that people will say that maybe don't have a direct translation, but means something in that particular culture. So there's the beginner, and then there's the intermediate, and then there's the advanced. So what I'm going to suggest this morning as one way of looking at this passage, when it comes to the issue of faith, there is beginner, there's intermediate, and advanced. And I think we see that as we watch how the disciples react to Jesus and react to the circumstances that they are facing as they get into the boat, and as they're in the boat, and as the storm comes up. So let's start with the beginner level. So faith at the beginner level. And let's look at just verses 35 through 36. And I'm going to call this, the beginner level of faith, I'm going to call this the joy of following. The joy of following, verses 35 and 36. As evening came, Jesus said to the disciples, "Let's cross to the other side of the lake." So they took Jesus in the boat and started out, leaving the crowds behind, although other boats followed. And now, so what's the big deal here? They got into the boat. Well, the disciples had been with Jesus now for quite some time, and at least 4 of the disciples were very familiar with boats and getting into boats, because 4 of them were fishermen, and it was an easy thing to get into. But not only that, were they used to being in boats, they were probably used to rough weather as well, because they were fishermen for a living. They knew how to handle a boat. They knew how to handle a boat in rough seas. That was their livelihood. That's what they were doing for a living. So And also, just skip up to verse 34, just before verse 35, and it says, you know, in fact, in his public ministry, and this is referring to Jesus, he never taught without using parables. But afterwards, when he was alone with his disciples, he explained everything to them. So here we have the disciples who are his inner circle. In a lot of ways, they kind of had the inside scoop with respect to Jesus, and because they were with him pretty much every day. He was telling parables to the crowds, to the people, to those who liked him, to those who didn't like him. But with his disciples, he wasn't only just telling the parables, this is what they mean. This is what these parables mean. So they had a kind of an inside track with Jesus. So it was very easy for them to follow him. And they trusted him, and they trusted his wisdom and his guidance, and they followed him wherever he went. And there was a joyful part to this, because here is somebody who is the Messiah. And we are his, shall we say, his in-group, his chosen inner circle, and we get to be part of what he's doing. And there's that joy, and they believed him, they followed him, they believed he was the Messiah, and there was that special joy that I believe that who he is, and I'm going to be following him. And there was a joy in that faith, that initial faith that they had in him. They continued to follow him, and if they stayed following him, they knew that things would go well for them. So I tried to think of an earthly example in my own childhood. When I was 12 years old, I was in the Boy Scouts and wore my uniform. Every week we'd go to our scout meetings. And every year, November 11th, and those of you who've been in Canada for a while know that November 11th is Remembrance Day. That's when we remember people who fought in wars in the past, and many of them who did not survive the wars, who died in those wars. And we have a special day set aside, and there's usually ceremonies at different parts of the city and throughout the country to honor those people who made sacrifices to defend our country. And so every year, if you were a Boy Scout in your local town, at least for us, all of the scouts would get together, and there'd be a ceremony at the local cenotaph, and we as scouts would march in our uniforms up to the cenotaph. We were kind of part of this parade. And it was really nice because I really was proud to be a scout. I was wearing this uniform, and I was joyful in following as our scout leader gave us the commands to march forward and to stop and to turn right, turn left, all those different things. And I was following his guidance, and we were all following his, but there was a certain joy and, shall we say, a faith in him. He was going to lead us to the right place, and we were going to have this special day together, and there we were on display, and there was a joy in following. And so there is a joy in following, and with these disciples, there was a joy in following Jesus. They liked what they saw. They loved this man who was the Messiah, who was God, and they felt very special, and they had the joy of following. So that was the beginner level of faith, joy of following, and really at that point, not a lot at stake. Not a lot at stake. Maybe, some of their friends might have thought they were a little weird. Maybe some of their family thought, this is why are you giving up your job and following this guy? And so there was some of that perhaps, but not really a huge sacrifice. They were with him. They believed in what he was doing. They had faith in him, and they had the joy of following Jesus. So let's move to the intermediate level. And I'm going to say the intermediate level of faith is the challenge of believing what you cannot see. The challenge of believing what you cannot see. And I think we see this in verses 37 through 40. And let's read starting at verse 37. But soon a fierce storm came up. High waves were breaking into the boat, and it began to fill with water. Jesus was sleeping at the back of the boat with his head on a cushion. The disciples woke him up shouting, "Teacher, don't you care that we're going to drown?" When Jesus woke up, he rebuked the wind and said to the waves, "Silence, be still." Suddenly the wind stopped, and there was a great calm. And then he asked them, "Why are you afraid? Do you still have no faith?" I read a story, it was quite a few years ago, and I don't remember all the details. It was in one of these books where you read about sermon illustrations. And a story about this large American city quite a few years ago. And there was an apartment building. I think it was probably about a 4-story or 5-story apartment building. And it was on fire. And the fire trucks were there. And there was a little girl, about 5 or 6 years old, on the top floor, hanging out a window, and she was the only one up there. The building was on fire. She was totally blind. This little girl, totally blind. The firemen had set up a net down below and were with a megaphone trying to get her to jump. And she just was paralyzed. She was too afraid. They were saying, the net's here, just jump it, because you can't. They were worried that she was going to burn to death in this building, right? And they were just frantic. How are we going to get out? I forget all the details, but they couldn't get a ladder up there. The only way this was going to work is if she jumped into this net that was below, and they were trying to convince her it's going to be safe, just jump. She wouldn't jump. She's just paralyzed. So they kept doing this. Finally, the little girl's father arrived. And as soon as the father got there, he got on. They gave him the bullhorn. And he said, "Okay, this is Daddy. He's here. When I say jump, I want you to jump." He said, "Jump." Right away, she jumped, and apparently she was so relaxed in her jumping, she didn't break a bone, she didn't twist an ankle, she just jumped, completely relaxed, fell into the net. And what happened there is she had faith in her daddy, and she jumped to the sound of her daddy's voice. When he said jump, she knew, faith, without seeing anything, that she would be safe, and she jumped. So that's an earthly illustration. And so I would wonder how it would have played out if the disciples had just continued to let him sleep. If here's the storm and this boat's going to and fro and water's coming into the boat. And again, remember, this must have been quite a storm because at least 4 of these disciples had seen this movie before. They had been in storms before because they were fishermen. So this must have been more than what they were normally used to because they were scared as well. So this must have been an extraordinary, brutal storm that even the experienced fishermen were afraid of. And they're going, don't you care that we drown? And so now think of Jesus as a man. Now, we know that Jesus is God, and even when he walked the earth, he was God, but he was also a man. So as a man, in his humanness, at that point, he was dead tired. He had been teaching the crowds for days, and he's exhausted. He gets into the boat, and he just falls into this deep, deep, deep sleep. And the storm comes, he's sleeping. And he's just dead tired, so tired that he's sleeping through this major storm. Yet, he is also God of the universe. And so what he is saying is, okay, yeah, maybe I was asleep, but have you forgotten that I am the Messiah? And what he was trying to say is, if you believe in my ministry, and if you believe we have a way forward here, do you think I'm going to let you all drown? Do you really think that? Think it through. Do you believe I'm God? Okay. Are we going to all end this right now then? We're going to drown in a fishing boat? What do you think? Now, having said that, I'm not going to be too hard on the disciples because I'm not sure that my response would have been any different. I don't think it would have been, to be honest. All of a sudden this storm comes up, I'm going to be a little stressed. And so that is the challenge of faith for all of us on a day-to-day basis. The challenge is, okay, God, I cannot exactly see this, but I'm choosing to believe you. And sometimes I'm good at that, other times not so good at all. That is the challenge of faith, choosing to believe what I cannot see. I cannot see this, God. I cannot see what you're asking me to walk into here. I cannot see right now any tangible evidence of what you're telling me, but I'm going to choose to believe it. And sometimes I pass that test, other times, not so much. But that's what he's calling us to. He's calling us to make that choice, to step forward, to believe because he is God. Believe in what you cannot necessarily see right in front of you. I cannot exactly see this God, but I am choosing to believe it. Finally, number 3, the advanced level. Faith at the advanced level. Realizing that God really is Lord of all. God really is Lord of all. Verse 41. The disciples were absolutely terrified. Who is this man? They asked each other. Even the wind and the waves obey him. Now, I thought they believed he was God, and they did, But all of a sudden, they see a supernatural act taking place. In theory, this should have been a simple concept. If we believe that God created the universe, then it would make sense that everything in the universe and the universe itself, he could choose to change the rules at any moment. He created the universe and all the storms that happen in it. So you would think that he could decide that we're not going to have this storm right now. We're going to stop it. It would make sense, right? He could control what was happening, right? The disciples believed that Jesus was Lord. But then suddenly, it's kind of like, wow, he really is Lord of everything. He really is God. He really is the Lord of the universe. He just told a storm to stop, and it stopped. Had they not been listening to him? Had they not heard what he had been teaching all this time? He had even explained the parables to them in a way that the crowds weren't getting. They had the inside scoop about who he was and what he was doing and all the mystery behind the parables. He was telling it all to them. They knew all that more than most people. Were they not getting it? Were they not listening to him? Well, yeah, they had been listening to him. They had been listening to him. But suddenly they found themselves in the advanced class on faith. Jesus really is Lord of all. They believed it. They would have never told you that wasn't true. But all of a sudden it actually happened, and they saw it, and it's like, oh yeah, I guess that's what that really means. He really is Lord of all. He's not just a wise guy telling wise sayings and promising us that we will be delivered one day. This guy is God. He really can control everything around him. I believed it. I thought I did. But whoo, man, this guy is God. I want to tell you about my dad, a little story about him. He had a grade 7 education. He didn't go any further than that. And he had challenges through a lot of his life, even as when he was with us as kids. But later on in life, he went through a major spiritual renewal. And when he did, he had a faith that I've never really seen anything like before in my personal experience. When he would talk about prayer, and if somebody was having challenges, whatever, they were feeling discouraged or needing something, he'd say to us kids, he'd say, and by then we were adults, he'd say, you should pray. He says, I don't know if God will answer your prayer. I can't promise you whether he'll answer your prayer. But I do know he will hear your prayer. That I know for sure. I don't know what he's going to do. I don't know how he's going to answer. But I know for sure he will hear your prayer. So you need to go to God. And he did pray. And God answered some of his prayers and not others. He asks for everything from the very practical to the very kingdom-influencing prayers. Some of the practical prayers. One prayer he actually prayed. This is before my brothers were Christians. Before me or my brothers were Christians. We were living in another city, and 2 of us, of the 3, were smoking quite a lot. We had a smoking habit. And I guess he just got up one day and decided, Lord, I want you to stop Paul and David from smoking. It's not good for them. I don't want them to smoke. David and I were living in completely different cities on the same day. We quit. We hadn't talked about it. We didn't know about it. Like, we had not discussed anything. I hadn't even said to him I should quit someday. We just got up, both of us, one morning in different cities and stopped smoking. Okay, so that's a practical thing. And Dad was grateful for that, but he wasn't awestruck by it because that was his God who could do that. Okay, God can control the universe. Okay, that was his God. He asked, and that was one prayer that God decided to answer for him. Thank you, Lord. I'm really grateful. Another prayer that had kingdom implications is my youngest brother, Peter, would see him, and by then he was a Christian, and the two of us weren't. He'd on his knees every morning, asking for the salvation of his boys, every single morning, and my brother would see this. And first came me, then came my brother a few years later. By then he had passed away, so he didn't get to see my third brother. But again, God answered his prayer. That one had kingdom implications. And for Dad, that was no big deal because he was God. He was a supernatural God who controlled the universe. And he didn't answer everything Dad asked for. Some things he said yes, other things he said no. But Dad believed that his Lord was Lord of all. So for Dad, there's an idiom in the English language. For Dad, it was go big or go home. When it comes to going to God's throne, when it comes to asking for things from God, go big or go home. In other words, don't ask for the small things. If you're going to ask him for something, ask him for something really special because he's God and he can do it. Don't go, okay, God, I just got this. I know you're busy. I just want this little thing. I'm not going to bug you for this other stuff, but can you at least do me this little favor? It's no. God, you're God. You can control the universe. This is what I'm asking for you. This is what I'm asking you for. I'd love it if you say yes. If you say no, well, that's okay too, because you're God. But I know you can do it, so I'm asking you for this. Go big. If you're going to go to God, if you're going to go to his throne room as a child of God, ask him for whatever you're dreaming you want him to do. And he might just say yes. And he might say no, or he might say wait. But that's okay. He can handle whatever request you ask of him. He's not going to get mad at you. He's not going to tell you to leave. Dad did not worry about how big or fantastic his request might be because he really believed God could grant it. That is what I want. If you say no, that's okay. But I know that you can say yes. And this is what I'm asking for. In my journey following Jesus, I have cycled through all three of those and still do. Beginner, intermediate, advanced. Beginner, the joy of following. Fairly straightforward. My God loves me. I love him. I follow him day to day. I have a moral compass. He shows me what's right from wrong, shows me how to live my life, and I love him. I love coming to church on Sunday, worshiping, singing, meeting brothers and sisters in Christ, the joy of following. I love it. That's the beginner, and it's great. And I embrace it, and I appreciate it. Intermediate. Every once in a while, God asks me to believe in something I cannot see. I'm God. Can you trust me on this? I'm asking you to step forward, or I'm asking you to wait, or I'm asking you just to be okay with not getting an answer right now and just keep being what I've asked you to be. Step out into the unknown and believe that your God is walking with you. And finally, he advanced, like my dad, actually approaching God's throne room, believing that my Lord really is Lord of all. Amen.